And I think one thing that has to be taken into consideration, I just did 3B and 4B not that long ago. And even though I realize I should probably not be numbering the episodes at the beginning so they can be moved around mysteriously, it's an idea. And it's something I'm noting on. But I didn't mind doing the 3B and 4B episodes. Shit's falling apart. And actually, I think when this shows up on your radar, it might be the end of May. I know the last episode I did, 9, had to do with Daredevil and the great, beautiful run that is called Volume 2. Oddly enough, I did not fucking predict that the show would be running at the same time I was doing that when I planned it out. I planned all this shit out in August, September of last year. So the extra episodes are just extra episodes. So I'm running X amount of episodes per season. All shit you don't need to know. But it gets me talking. It makes things a little more fluid. And allows me to get on with this episode. I would like to point out one thing. The process of being on point. Okay. Most of the stuff I'm presenting, I've been talking about for roughly 30 years, maybe more. My shift of focus has always changed because things get highlighted, things get focused on. But as I came up in the 80s and 90s, right? I'm realizing there are events that are significant. And one of the things I'm going to discuss today is the two people that seem to understand it in a very weird and uncanny way at a specific point in time, specifically from 1990 to about 92, 93, they were screaming it in their routines. One of them was, the primary person I'm going to talk about, was subjected to the state and them trying to weigh in on him. Where the other one was just analyzing the culture, which I thought was really interesting. I will tell you this. Being on point doesn't necessarily mean people are going to listen to anything you fucking say. Telling people, like having good forecasting skills, like telling somebody in advance, like, hey, don't shack up with her because you end up with a fucking situation you don't want to be in, right? I've done this for a few people. And, or don't fucking date that guy. Or, hey, you should probably invest in this or focus on that and do that. Okay. Here's what's weird. The empirical structure, like the structure that tells you every day what you should be doing, doesn't necessarily give you the greatest advice, which is strange because for many years it did. But that seemed to go sideways sometime after the 60s. So there is, to gain an understanding of the culture and get good forecasting tips, you're not necessarily given the data straight up front. You have to know somebody to get the special data with the special ring. Fuck all that. I don't agree with any of that. But at the same point in time, you also have the culling of people. Like, we need bodies to fill these things. This is why I did those two episodes, because it shows weight and how much power you actually have as a collective group and as an individual. And so when you're on point and you're telling people in advance things and giving them an idea, and you may not know all the details, but a lot of it's gut and just analyzing the process, right? That is a thing. But it's not appreciated. And all the time, you're either people. You would think people would say, "Hey, you fucking gave me that advice and it worked out." Like there would be appreciation for that, or you kind of gave me that warning and I didn't listen. you gain. No, that's not how it works. However, I will tell you, when I was listening to these two people back in the day, I knew what they were saying was significantly important. But they weren't necessarily embraced by the mainstream, despite the fact we had the breakout of alternative culture in probably 91, 92, right? The industry built on lies and bullshit kind of fell apart, and they were just scooping up anybody, any artist, not knowing what they were looking at. I'll eventually get into that anecdote. From my perspective, my own personal history. So, being on point is knowing, having an understanding, and the ability to forecast the way things will unfold. And guiding your routines in the modern day to fit that, right? That's my definition of that, right? Meeting the task with the skill set needed, right? That's another way to look at it. So what I'm going to talk about today is, I'm pretty sure it's Eric Bauscher, but it's Jello Biafra. He's legendary frontman of the original Dead Kennedys lineup, and Dead Kennedys music is still somewhat philosophically relevant till today, which is sad. But it's recorded from like the late 70s up until like the mid to late 80s. He also worked in LARD, Jello Biafra, and the Guantanamo School of Medicine. He was at the battle in Seattle doing the no WTO combo with Chris Novoselic, Kim Thiel from Soundgarden, and Gina was the drummer. I can't remember where she's at, what band she was in, off the top of my head. Also worked with the Melvins and DOA. Clearly, if you like Dead Kennedys stuff, the stuff he's involved in usually is pretty, goes away. It needs to go. It's always usually on point. I know I've read somewhere that HR from Bad Brains is doing some shows with the Kennedys. That's interesting. Which way? Why he became a focal point was a couple of the reasons. Obviously, singer of the Dead Kennedys. He ran for mayor of San Francisco back in the late 70s, early 80s. That was, again, I'm not going to get into his story. This is what I mean. Like, I'm not going to spend tons of time talking about and regurgitating in a third-person way these anecdotes, because this man released a bunch of spoken word. And you should listen to him, and there's a reason why. So I'm going to get into this in a second. So what makes the Dead Kennedys very important? Obviously being a big deal punk band, right? Is that they were part of the four-trial system in the 80s. Now, way back in the day, during the 50s era, 40s, 50s era, right, you had the House of Un-American Activities, which is spearheaded by Joseph McCarthy. This was interesting because this was the first time, I'm pretty sure, in American history that they started holding art accountable. Well, that sounds crazy because art shouldn't really be held accountable. It's art. Like, it's designed for interpretation. It makes statements. You either agree or don't agree. That's how it is, right? It's the reason why I think Mein Kampf should exist in bookstores. I don't support it, but the idea that it should exist, because people should read it and say, wow, this is tons of bullshit right here, right? Or, in the same point in time, other books should exist, like Letters from Birmingham Jail by MLK, right? Those two books should exist, always, in rotation, how it should be, right? Because it is selection. It is freedom of speech. Like, you should be able to interpret all that stuff yourself, right? Or discuss it, actively discuss it, critique it. That allows it to be understood on a mass, profound level, right? So, the House of American Activities, and actually, Comic Book Confidential is probably the documentary you want to see by Ron Mann. It came out in '88, and it covers comic books' existence and the scrutiny and the weird stigma comic books have. I may have already noted this for you, but I'm reiterating it because the pieces of trial from William Gaines, eventually publisher of Mad Magazine, EC Comics, back in the day, is beautiful. It's well done. It's great retort and response to a hardline right-wing inquisition on American arts and philosophies. Like, it is fucked up that we even had that. It's a very dark era, right? And it's interesting because during the 80s, this is resurrected to a degree in a very soft way, and it shows up as the PMRC. And the people behind the PMRC are interesting because they designed the idea to patrol music. Because in all the arts, music is the one that catches the earworm. Because it doesn't even have to have lyrics to it. It's just sounds. It works because the idea is it buries into your brain. And the rhythm or harmony or just the repetition of the sound clicks. Human beings kind of wired like this in an interesting way. There's probably more to that. I don't understand it, but I know this is important. So the focal point was on music. And this first trial really had to do with, was the idea of putting labels on the records. Parental advisory, right? And they wanted to put what's on these albums is explicit sex, occultism, so on and so forth, right? And you think you just went that, like maybe the idea this would become a forbidden fruit thing. And it kind of did, right? It kind of was a, hey, I got the album with this on. Because they eventually got it on there, but it wasn't on there the way they wanted it to be on there. So it's interesting because there's a lot of things that came out of this. So Dee Snider, John Denver, and Frank Zappa ended up fighting the first wave of this. And that is an interesting collection of people. Like Dee Snider ends up becoming all three of them become a major hero in this battle. Frank Zappa did the independent stuff, which shows us, hey, we can do our own music, right? That's very important to note. The second trial is Dead Kennedy's trial. And now what's interesting is I'm not suggesting, I'm implying that these are all kind of put together, that there is definitely an ominous force behind all of this stuff because it seems too clear and linear, at least philosophically. If it's not people saying this is what needs to be done or encouraging what needs to be done, philosophically, it's there, right? You can see, the idea that this exists is going to create a larger issue along. Yeah, no. Here's what's funny. So we became more aware of kidnappings and horrible shit, people doing evil shit, right? And I'm not saying people don't do evil shit. They do, right? But we became more aware of that. I think the scarier people, the people that think they're doing good stuff and it's evil, those people are the scarier ones, right? Thus, modern, politics, right? So they have a setup, and people become more aware of serial killers and child abduction and all this stuff around this time, which perpetuates the whole satanic panic, which I should probably do a long-ass episode on that, or a general discussion about that. Not sure. Any which way. That happens. So they use that as an argument. The other one is race baiting. People, different skin tones might fuck around. Yeah, don't fucking understand that shit. But that's a thing. Okay? That's a thing. Oh, the evils of, it's like fucking weird ass, oh brother, we're out there argument, right? But that's the thing. Those are the two ways they angle it in, right? And during the trials, they were trying to like clean up everything. And that's very important to note. So Dead Kennedys go on trial and they decide to defend. Now the rumor was, Biafra and another source made me aware of this, that I guess the goal was to go after Ozzy. But I guess Ozzy had made a lot of money from the first solo album, so they decided not to go that direction. They were looking for a target to make an example of. And that's what they do. They use a fear tactic and a hardline tactic in order to be able to railroad. And what they did is they used a whole voter base structure from evangelical right, and this crazy voting mailing system that they used in order to combat culture. Now understand, this wasn't like the House of Un-American Activities where you had the fucking trials every day and on television, and honestly, like, this is complete bullshit. But it created a blacklist. Understand, it was kind of effective to a certain degree. It put people out of work. And the question, oh, you communists. No, dude, I just think fucking workers should get paid, like, wage, like, livable wage, and have, like, lives, and, you know, not work themselves to death. What? That's crazy, right? But that's essentially what it was, right? Now, you have a percentage of probably like, oh, you communists. It doesn't matter. You're in America. First Amendment. You're allowed to talk about these ideas. It's people's decisions to accept these ideas and move forward. Same thing with my bullshit. If you listen to my bullshit and you're like, hey, he has a point. Cool. Fucking great for you. But guess what? I might not. I might be talking out of my ass most of the time. You don't fucking know that. I don't know that, right? That's how it is, right? I'm just telling you, I'm a person. I live in it every day. This is how I interpret things around me, right? And you, the plus or minus with my situation. You can hate on me as much as you fucking want. It doesn't make a lick of difference. It doesn't matter in the long run, right? This is why philosophically I don't give a fuck about the comments. I don't give a fuck about your reactions in that, right? If you support what I'm doing, so be it. If not, it is what it is, right? I can tell you there's enough people around me, at least in the last 5 years of my life, that have been saying I should be doing this. So that's why I'm doing it. I'm talking to a fucking blank void. And it's fucking hard to do, to coordinate. Because I'm not like, hey, super wealthy, crazy parents. Hey, look, I'm trying to be an influencer. Fuck that. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to present ideas to you, right? And I'm grinding like every other worker in this society. And with me doing that alone, taking time out to do this, you kind of have to respect it a little. So this trial happens, and Biafra and crew defend themselves in court. And a lot of it has to do with the painting, which I'll get into in a few minutes. The third trial ended up being Judas Priest. Now, here's the thing interesting about the Judas Priest trial. I think there's a documentary on this, right? You can find. I think there was an article. There was a whole book behind it. And the song was a cover song from a band called Spooky Tooths. It was on one of their earlier releases. And the song was Better by You, Better Than Me. And it went to trials under civil action, subliminal messages, again, the whole satanic panic thing. It's included because it was designed for the sole purpose to hold them accountable for lyrics that supposedly existed in the songs through backmasking. It's just the idea of like satanic panic. And we're going backwards to an album. Judas Priest is on the list of bands they just didn't like. Metal, the idea of metal, okay? And punk rock. And I prefer more punk rock than metal. I don't mind metal. Clearly I did a Black Sabbath nod. The last one was Two Live Crew. And the goal was obviously explicit sex, so on and so forth. And to the best of my knowledge, they lost all of this stuff, even though those fucking stickers end up on the albums. Okay? And I thought that was really interesting. But the goal for this was a soft attack on arts again and freedom of speech. And it's interesting because during this period of time, they presented themselves under the guise of concerned parents and weirdly conservative people. And it was both parties. There's an interesting twist. Now, if you grew up in the 80s, right, you kind of couldn't really differentiate between the two parties. They existed. There was like this weird, taking consideration the major leaders for the Democratic Party were taken out to a certain degree, right? They were removed. Sadly, it would have been a whole different world, right? If you really think about it. I don't think Nixon would have got in if Robert wasn't killed. I really genuinely I think that's a significant event in history. It's not looked at as much as John. And again, all of those deaths are significant. They weigh on the culture. But with that said, the one I'm going to focus on the most is Frankenchrist, and the album had a post insert by H.R. Giger. And H.R. Giger did a few covers of albums. I think Blondie, the Deborah Harry album, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery, and he also designed the Alien Xenomorph, right? So the artwork, which understand it's artwork, it's very fucking important. It doesn't matter how graphic it is. Now, here's what's weird. You can give a heads up and give people selections. Hey, this is about to turn in this direction. This could be really violent. This could be perceived to be sexual, pornographic, whatever you want to say. I can kind of understand that, right? But to verbote it, right? I like the way the rating system is for movies, because I could bring my kids to pretty much any movie, right? Even though they have the NC-17, I can bring my kids to a rated R movie. It's not that big of a deal, right? I can show them content and then discuss it with them, right? That's the thing. That's what you're supposed to do as a parent. Even hard books, all this stuff, right? But the selection process, it's kind of frustrating that we're not having these conversations earlier on, especially in secondary school, especially in high school, when this is now kids looking out to the outside world and already knowing pieces of it. Here's what's weird. You have kids that understand things that are adult-like, but they're not fully understanding them. And I think that's the mistake of high school. I know, some random thing. So the work was Penis Landscape, work 219 Landscape X, right? Penises and vaginas, right? Airbrushed, Giger style. This was the piece in the album. So you had to get the album, this existed. This went to the trial. This became a big deal. And instead of me explaining all this to you, I would like you to listen to the High Priest of Harmful Matter, which is Biafra's second spoken word album, because he's going to give you better notes because he was physically fucking there. But that's where I'm going to go with that. That is significant. Those 4 censorship trials in the 80s and 90s are significant. And when they couldn't win them in the courts, they used them in public arena. Think of it this way. Despite the whole thing with Body Counts Cop Killer, right? They really used the press to lambast the situation, despite the fact that the album was out quite some time before LA riots, right? That's a significant thing. That's a gray area. There's a lot of things to unpack there. I'm not going to get into that. That's just one of the albums I remember being censored. It was removed and changed, and there was an alternate ending on the album. So there's first print cassettes, CDs, vinyl, I imagine, at the time, and then there was these alternate prints, right? I'm not sure if they ever recollected it again. I would have to actually look that up. So the public arena became the focal point. If we can't get him in the legal system, the courts, because definition of art and free speech, it's very important. It's the First Amendment for a reason, right? And everybody's like, the guns, that's second, right? Clearly defense, right? So the first one is the most important. It's the reason why people will leave different countries to go different places, right? It's the reason why you got expansions on business charters here to this country, which was not this country, right? Because freedom of speech, religion. So, with that said, I'm going to point out the one thing that's really important about these albums and these trials. They call them the witch trials, by the way. Whole satanic panic, with things you don't know, the evils. Jello Biafra released 5 spoken word albums. Some of them really lengthy, right? And plus and minuses to all of them. Some of them are just prose pieces. Some of them are speeches and so on and so forth, right? So I will say to you, the most important thing this work generated was about censorship in the U.S. So all the albums, from No More Cocoons, High Priest of Harmful Matter, which is mainly about the trial, I Blow Minds for a Living, one of my favorite, Beyond the Valley of the Gift Police. I love the fucking cover of that album. It's fucking hilarious. If Evolution is Outlawed, Outlaws Will Evolve. And that's the 5th one. So all 5 of them are interesting because there's a few albums after that. But the thing that takes centerpiece because of the trial is the talk about censorship. Because he's putting it together in real time. Right? Okay, so situations happen. Dead Kennedys exist. They're given this stuff. And they look at the world in a specific way. Right? So you have them trying to understand things as they're walking through them. Now, there's a lot of underground nefarious shit going on. I will reiterate again. The U.S. was kind of cut up, is still kind of cut up till today, meaning that there's different markets in different areas, different parts of the country, right? There's some people that had access to certain things at certain points in time, and certain people didn't. And I've met a lot of them in different states, specifically from the Midwest. There's a lot of information that doesn't permeate to the Midwest as a mainstream thing. You had to know somebody. Like, it had to genuinely be underground, which is something I should probably talk about, the idea of underground, because it's been talked about amongst a few people recently. And I'm like, what's weird about the underground now is it's not that underground. It's like goes the whole Rage Against the Machine lyric. They just don't burn the books, they just remove them, right? This situation is like, it exists, and it doesn't require that much digging to find it. And it's there, but it goes unnoticed. And I think these trials and the other piece I'm going to get to today kind of leads up to that, right? So they call them the witch trials. Biafra covers it in High Priest for Harmful Matter. Check them all out. But his real major work as a performance artist, outside of all the music, is to talk about censorship. Because as he's doing it, he's gathering data. So some of it's raw data, some of it is a strong narrative, right? And it's a great pivot to write about censorship. Like, it correlates really well with the House of Un-American Activity stuff. Because the goal is to culture wars. The goal is to fight them and to show the evils of these things. They're not evil. These artists interpreting life, creating art. That is needed. That is needed a lot more than what you realize. And I will argue currently right now, the zeitgeist, the larger mechanism that oversees all of the popular culture, kind of buries a lot of that. A lot of what is genuine, real artists doing artist work. Distribution, there's a whole layer to it. And I think that canning or suppression of that is important to know. You gotta take into consideration one thing. A lot of the stuff I do is raw. It's about maybe 10 to 20% written as cue cards. I am talking it over with people before I present this stuff. But it's pretty raw. So what I'm suggesting, and this is my speculative analysis, right, is that if we can suppress artists making art and having a general access to public, to consumers, to people, right, to audience, and create a multi-layered structure of middlemen and gatekeepers to profit off of it, or to subvert it, or to stall it, then the natural flowback system of American culture is never felt. So it's much easier to conquer and divide. Because what's weird is if you get a bunch of people in a room long enough, they'll start having major agreements. They'll disagree initially. And I've watched this. And then they'll find things that they agree upon, right? And oddly enough, we have more in common than not in common, right? We all have to live, pay bills, move forward, learn, have life experiences. Those are really common. And it's hard for some people to see that because there's a lot of middlemen in between. So the talk about censorship and the structures to nail this was started pretty much by the House of Inter-American Activities, actually even before that. It was started in the late 1800s when they changed the way news was presented and created the whole yellow journalism structure, right? And that is a really long discussion. But the Yellow Kid, the cartoon comic strip, plays a lot into that, right? I'm pretty sure it's called Yellow Kid. But during that era, they changed it to the inverted pyramid and created this concept called news holes. Now, the inverted pyramid is designed to give you information up front and the story behind. I probably already explained this. News holes are designed as the space left over after the advertisements are placed, meaning that the advertisements take more precedence than the stories. It creates an inherent bias that magazines have to figure out, periodicals, news sources, radio stations, all this has to figure out how to combat and level off. And sometimes they don't. And I think sometimes during the course of the 80s, that leveling off got smaller and smaller and smaller. It may have started in the 60s. Because understand, in the 60s, something major happened. Youth independent movement, right? You had a lot of young people that want to change things. That scares establishment structure. I'm not saying it was smooth. I'm not saying all of it was right, or correct, I should say. But there was a push to change things. And the target was the music afterwards. We're now in the 80s, and now music's on trial. And it's the softest 80s, too, because a lot of the material that exists on the radio stations in the 80s, like when you're telling me Huey Lewis is equal to Led Zeppelin, I'm sorry, it's not. I can't stand the Huey Lewis in the news. And you're telling me I'm supposed to, even Bon Jovi, all respect to Bon Jovi, he is what it is, right? The band is what it is, right? But realistically, there's a lot of better, there's bands that prior to them set a different precedent, right? And you're like, I'm supposed to accept this. At least they're close to versus Huey Lewis in the news. But that's how it is. So during this time, we have these trials to try to lock down and tamper down what we don't agree should exist, despite the fact it feeds a market. Every time you suppress stuff, you create a secondary market. So I'm pretty sure somebody in the back end was going, how much money I'm going to make off this later on. And there's an argument for that based upon this. So Jello Biafra back in the late 80s, early 90s, up to the late 90s to a certain degree, is still arguing about censorship. He's making you aware of the people that are culling the culture, the mainstream culture. They're trying to orchestrate whatever they're trying to orchestrate. Now, you can understand one thing. I'm going to tell you this right now. And this is speculative, but as time's gone on, the ramifications of it, in hindsight, suggest that I'm closer to right than not, right? But still hardcore conspiracy theory, if you really want to argue, right? In 98, things changed. 97, 98, things changed, right? Especially with radio. Because during the Clinton era, conglomerates started happening. So all radio stations, even ones that didn't really matter, will eventually put to death. They will close down, shut it down. Small little independent stations, right? Because the goal was to control it. If we can't control the labels and can't force the labels to do what they do, we can control the sources in which they need to sell their products, right? Now, I'm going to tell you one thing. Word of mouth, me doing this right now, is more important. Word of mouth, people interacting with people and sharing ideas, is more infectious than whatever the media can give you. They can just do it as a bureaucratical system, meaning that 72 channels will roll out the same product, same commercial at 72 points in time. At the same point in time at 72 different venues, right? So everybody that's watched television at one point in time will watch that commercial at one point in time and go, oh, okay, this is a product. That's how they move universally, right? Word of mouth is more infectious. Word of mouth has you saying what you need to say and moving forward. And then somebody's going to expose themselves, take it as a footnote, go back to it, and have their own interpretation of it. Right? Oh, this is kind of dope. Right? The idea of reading comic books, right, is kind of important. Why? Because it's a baseline. It's more interesting than television most of the time, right? Depending on how they're done. And modern television is mirroring the better arts, right? To a degree. Network television, like these fucking cop shows and these hard, like stupid ass sitcoms, like they're horrible. The jokes may have gotten a little better, but for the most part, it's trash. It's the same soap opera heroin that they've been giving you for years. Like, will Sally and Chuck meet next week? Or, it doesn't fucking matter. Like, it's fucking stupid, right? But this is the dope that the conduit of radio, which is what television was birthed from, exists on. They needed to take from other arts in order to make themselves more relevant again, right? And this is the arts that I'm talking about that's kind of being suppressed, right? At the end of this, I'm going to read you a list of albums that I had people randomly select over time, over the 21st century. That's something significant there, right? So, Biafra exists. He does his talk censorship stuff. It's on 5 albums. No More Cocoons, High Priest for Harm for Matter, I Blow Minds for a Living, Beyond the Valley of the Gift Police, If Evolution is Outlawed, Outlaws Will Evolve. Now, the other person, this is more or less an outsider point. And he was really significant. And in all honesty, if he would have lived longer, I think we would have had a more interesting 90s. Bill Hicks, comedian, right, was coming up down the pipeline. Now, Hicks evolved. He's one of the few comedians that you watched naturally evolve on stage, right? He's clever as fuck. There's documentaries, I think on Tubi, there's still documentaries on him about his career. I'm going to have a side note to Dennis Leary because there is a kind of a weird dark spot under Leary's career because of Bill Hicks. But I want it to be clear. I like Dennis Leary's stuff too. I like him. He presents an interesting alternative in popular culture. So even though the critique is there, and it's not a new critique, I'm breaking ground on this critique. No, this is just something that's kind of known, but not necessarily known. So Bill Hicks puts out Dangerous and Relentless. And the material predates Dennis Leary's No Cure for Cancer, right? There is speculation to a certain degree that the two of them, that Leary borrowed a lot of ideas from Bill Hicks. But the difference between, and this is where it's interesting. So sometimes art is interesting. Sometimes you'll have two different people that interpret something, right? So you can say he literally stole material from Bill Hicks. You can say that. I think the two of them probably have seen more eye to eye. I think Leary liked Hicks probably. It's really hard because Leary's interpretation of the Bill Hicks material is uniquely to Dennis Leary. However, it has more of a blue-collar, Bostonian, bittersweet conservatism to it. And Bill Hicks didn't necessarily have that. It was hard critique of things, right? This is going to lend into my last piece. Here's what's weird. When I was constructing this episode, it was going to be short. I know you can cut out a lot of fat. You just talk randomly about shit. I understand that. You're right, I do. But it was supposed to be short because then I realized yesterday that I'm tacking on something that I may have already talked about, but this is the lead up to that, right? So Bill Hicks does Dangerous and Relentless. All 4 albums that were published need to be checked out. Actually, all of the Bill Hicks material needs to be combed through because there's something that actually happens with the albums that I didn't realize was a thing until the variation versions exist. So Bill Hicks records all these albums, talks about culture, rock and roll music, right? Which Dennis Leary covers on No Cure for Cancer. 2 different interpretations. Similar subject matter, 2 different interpretations, right? His is more just an outright critique and bitter sweetness and attack, where Bill Hicks is like the modern stuff. Like you have Debbie Gibson and these modern, like Jimi Hendrix himself would destroy most of these people's careers if he was still living, right? The Doors. Like think about the music that would have been perpetuated through the 70s up until the 80s by the time these soda pop stars kind of existed, right? Neil Young had a song called This Note's For You. And a lot of it has to do with the buying of popular artists. Like, they always kind of were bought. But this was overt. And this started happening during Reagan's second term. Right? So when that song broke out, it hit a lot of people, a lot of blue-collar people I knew, a lot of working-class people, right? So Bill Hicks' critique of that was, this is not the same. Now, what I just said to you about Bon Jovi and Huey Lewis in the News, he was commenting on. I kind of agree. It's like Van Halen earlier on is not the same as Van Hagar. Not the same fucking beast. And I don't care if you made more money. You're not the same beast. The components are not the same. Right? However, the last major Van Halen album, right, has a good song called As If. And why the fuck they did not lead with that as a single, I do not know. But it is a really heavy song with David Lee Roth as a singer. And when I went through the album, I'm like, this is not a bad album, but that song hits harder than every other song on this album. So, which way? Sidebar. So, Bill Hicks' material comes out. Dennis Leary ends up doing this mirroring piece of it. I advise you to listen to both of them. You'll get what I'm talking about. Revisit this material. Revisit old material, especially with stuff that's critiquing society, because it's saying something, and it's being a big signal flare. Now, Bill Hicks, to my understanding, and I could be corrected with this, but to my understanding, he just got out of rehab. So when he was looking at things and recording the other stuff and cancer diagnosis and all this other stuff, he wasn't necessarily placed on mainstream television. He didn't get those comedian spots. To my understanding, he worked with David Letterman a lot, but they really had a hard time with getting him going because there was something that was taking place at this point in time in history that kind of went unnoticed, right? And this leads to a future episode discussion. Bill Hicks recorded Arizona Bay and Ranting in E minor in 92, 93. I'm going to tell you this right now. These albums were not released till 97. If these albums were released not that far after they were recorded, Bill Hicks would have been a big fucking deal. Because his commentary on police brutality against brown and black people, his commentary on the Bush and the military-industrial complex, the first Iraq war, its scathing structure against evangelicals, and a lot of the fevered egos, like on Ranting in E minor, like out of the two albums, if there's any album you have to listen to Bill Hicks, I know I mentioned this in season 1, it's Ranting in E minor, the Variations version, which is more modern release, which is even crazier, right? So these albums were released, and they were released with the Marblehead Johnson, the band, interludes, musical interludes, between segments. They weren't released uncut. You didn't get the full volume. Now with the Biafra work, he released his own stuff. Alternative Tentacles was the platform for the Biafra records, right? And he released his own material. So it is uncut. And you're like going, God, he's talking a long time. It doesn't matter. Listen to it. Take notes. You fucking tighten up. Like, don't be a baby about shit. Take notes. Because the names said on those albums are important. Right? The commentary said in this album is very important. And it's funny because people are like, well, I don't really like comedians. Because I think you're used to the Jerry Seinfeld style comedian. Right? The set up and punchline, set up and punchline, set up and punchline. Which I don't necessarily have a problem with those comedians. I don't mind, Jerry Seinfeld. Like, he has a place in comedy history. I don't even base it on his money, just what he did, right? That's significant. He was talking about pro-lifers and the Austin roll call. He lambasted Jay Leno, who was friends with him, for doing the Doritos commercial. It shows up on these albums. And the Variations versions are the uncut versions of the albums. So the musical interludes don't exist on those albums. And they were recently released, like probably in the last 10 years. Right? So if you're able to get stream service or get these, I would, fucking buy them tangible. Please buy this shit tangible. I'm telling you about this stuff because for the most part, Jello Biafra and Bill Hicks are speaking truth to power at the right point in time, when American culture is shifting. And it's interesting. American culture's shift to the underground left happens because of the great whitewash of the late 80s. Now, I probably mentioned this before, but the great American whitewash takes place during Reagan's second term. And what it does is literally squeaky cleans up television and frameworks it in a specific point of view. This only lasts so long. But it's felt by a lot of the American culture because some people accept it. Like people of certain means and certain worldviews accept this material. Then there's certain people that will go, what the fuck is this? Right? And the normal working class people will like, yeah. Generation X itself kind of started tuning it out. Like, and they literally were catering to us as much as they possibly could in order to get us on their teat, right? But we kind of tuned it out. Like, you had to be literally aggressive in your approach towards material, right? I'm not saying there wasn't deviations, Roseanne, the show, became successful because it decided to eventually show classism again. Right? The Simpsons, the animation fervor, right? Alternative to Disney. Because what's interesting about Disney is Disney sets a precedence that most of us go, wow, it's way too fucking squeaky clean. This is why we liked Pixar. And Disney eventually buys Pixar. But it's way too squeaky clean. It's just not, okay, there's some good stuff. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying people shouldn't watch these stuff. I prefer not to, right? There's a few Disney films I like, but it's, most of the time it's just like, God, you're going to start singing again. And that's pretty much about the size of it, right? But then every so often there's a Wreck-It Ralph. Every so often there's a Bambi, right? That was earlier on, but those are important, in my opinion, cinematically. Those are important films. And the Great Whitewash happens when they shift the culture. And the best example I've probably already provided this for you, and I apologize if I'm doing this all again, is when Tony Danza goes from Taxi to Who's the Boss. The weird suburban escapism is fucking crazy. And it's funny because the country itself was hitting hard. The war on drugs and a lot of the things that were happening, the domestic violence structure, the brazen, there was so much shit going on in America. Like Iran-Contra, but television pacified. It gave you idle time to a certain degree. This pacification really wasn't for Generation X. That's why we had a tendency not to like it. This pacification was really for millennials because we're going to build a new kid. And I'm pretty sure, this is all speculative now. You're like, well, do you have some hardcore No, dude, I could tell you this happened. Right? I watched this happen. Anybody that has a relatively good memory remembers this happening. I remember going, wow, these shows suck. Right? At 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, cartoons sucked. And you're like, well, that's normal for you. That's maturation. You would move on to other things, like going to play sports. No, cartoons went right to the shithole. And it was around the time they were trying to get rid of cartoons. They were trying to reduce the amount of animation. I shit you not. There's a history of this, right? And because why? Cartoons do something different. Right? It permeates the culture, right? A lot of weird sexual shit with cartoons, a lot of weird creative shit with cartoons, a lot of weird commentary and mocking. Cartoon characters and comedians are very fucking important in our culture because they poke the holes through the bullshit. And that's what it's all about. So around this time, cartoons started sucking. I remember thinking to myself, and it wasn't just me, it was several kids. Like, wow, this is kind of boring now. What the fuck is this? I don't know. Right? Now, there is a charge. Don't get me wrong. Around this time, there's experimentations, and I've mentioned this before. Zillennials are interesting because they're a batch that remembers the end of the old way America was operating or presenting itself. And then this new way, which is the Great American Whitewash, shows up in the late 80s. So, Full House and whatever other fucking show existed in the late 80s that was just newly minted fell under this stricter criteria. And this criteria of censorship and gatekeeping exists in every network. And I'm pretty sure wealthy people said, you know what, let's do wealthy people shit. Let's support the administration and purge all this topics of race, gender, all this shit. Let's reduce it to as much as we possibly can. Let's not open up the Norman Lear or creative writers from the 70s and how they did things to actually tackle issues, right? Let's not do that. But we'll have episodes about, drug use, or maybe you're fucking too much. That existed, right? I remember tuning out and looking at all this stuff and thinking to myself, this is all bullshit. And now, mind you, I shouldn't have had the faculties to be able to figure this out. Because by your measurement, I should have known this stuff. I should have known. I should have just kept. No, there was a fundamental shift. The first car seat, again, I'm going to reiterate this, if I've said this already, amazed the shit out of me. Because I'm like, that kid's not that short. What are you trying to say? It wasn't. It was for safety reasons. But that wasn't my generation. There was a shift. So it's interesting, Bill Hicks points out music at the time. These soda pop stars, these, people that they mauled toward, that's what they did, and they kept that sound in normal music realms, meaning that bands form together, they get small gigs here and there, then they do these tours and build up their audience, right? You get maybe a 7-inch or fucking EP, double-sided EP, double deluxe EP with fucking 2 things, right? Or you get an LP or whatever, you get stuff, right? You get played in college radio. They work through the circuits till some label, some money big label says, son, we want you to sign the contract here, so we own you for a little while. Rather than you own your own self, right? I have a point here, right? So these pop stars, which Bill Hicks was criticizing earlier on, existed, right? Biafra does it backhandedly. Bill Hicks, because he's on the outside, he's not the one going through trial. Biafra did. He went through the mechanics of being hit hard with his band. Hicks didn't. He was on the outside analyzing what was going on, which, interesting, the two of them come to the same conclusion. The shift on children takes place around this time. I'm not saying look at your children as, now think about this. 100 years ago or so, maybe even longer than that, children at the age of, once they were done with 8th grade, went to the factories. I'm not saying that's right, but that was a thing. Teenagers is still less than 100 years old. The concept of a teenager is still less than 100 years old. That is a fact. That's not speculative. I'm not just putting this random fucking number out of the top of my head. No, that's a fact. They didn't want teenagers competing with veterans coming back in school or ones that didn't go to secondary school. So they created public secondary school, right? The idea of teenagers exists. It's based on the fervor of rock and roll, right? And R&B. Like genuine R&B, not the 90s casual singing R&B. The rhythm and blues structure back in the day, right? So that's why that became the soundtrack for that youth culture. Interesting. This is all there. This is things that actually exist. There's fucking books, tons of books on this, right? Just general rock and roll history will teach you this shit, right? So, and you wonder why that's not a subject in school now. Like, why aren't we talking about that now? Why are we still having jazz surveys, which are very important too? Blues surveys, very important, right? Classical surveys, very important. All that is very, why is there not a rock one, right? We're hitting how many years now, right? Since late 40s to now, like you decide not to ever teach us an extracurricular concept. Really? That's not a thing? Interesting. The world's an interesting place, right? So the concept of a teenager as a standard is still a relatively new concept to human history. Prior to a certain point, you had kids working in factories, right? So the idea of introducing this material to these kids at this point in time, impressionable youths, because it wasn't designed for me. Bill Hicks was a lot older, so he's looking at this stuff going, why the fuck is this taking mainstream culture? I don't know. You have these mall tours, like I said, focusing on the kids. This is the great demographic market. The malls are the safer place. You have mall rats. That literally, not just a movie, there's a term that existed before the movie, right? That literally went around the malls watching things. So if you have free concerts there, we have, pretty privilege. You get to, ones that can sing, right? And Bill Hicks smashes it all with the idea of just Jimi Hendrix in a crude way, but it's shit's fucking hilarious. I'm not going to give it away. I can't even do it justice. Listen to the material, right? But honestly, it fails. New Kids in the Block, New Edition, this weird fucking... It doesn't do... New Edition gains stability not because of the initial structure. That was the hype. And there's always some creepy fucking guy behind these things, right? That was the hype. And I know there was a guy. I just don't know the guy's fucking name. So New Kids in the Block, same model. So, white. So they existed. Now, there was New Kids in the Block and New Edition. New Edition had a multitude of talent. So they went on to do different variations of themselves, right? Bobby Brown broke his solo career, Belle Biv DeVoe, so on and so forth. They caught a different wave, right? But this was a thing. And they had control of most of it. But it wasn't designed for Generation X. It was really designed for millennials. They thought that was going to ride through, but then the 90s happened. It's interesting because I live in a part of the country right now that doesn't really like what happened in the 90s, as a general thing. Like, I've never heard such harsh criticism of Nirvana before. Not saying Nirvana is the end-all of end-all. Most of the time, they don't even know who the fuck Fugazi is. So it's like, really? Huh? That's a thing? Right? But yet, the 10 album is loved. But yet, the rest of Pearl Jam, it's kind of those 90s bands. Seriously, that's been a comment, right? I'm fucking amazed by that. I'm like, that's a thing. Well, you know what happened? What? All your shitty-ass Hairspray rock kind of went right to the hell. Like, that was propping up the rebels, right? Motley Crue changed the songs to, what is it, their weak-ass cover of Anarchy in the UK. It just changed things and just do whatever lap dances that the fucking record labels want them to do. That shit just drove me fucking insane, right? Now, there was some decent bands, but they kind of like, when I listen to radio now, that's not being played. Nope. Can't do Anthrax. Can't do any other fucking... Faith No More, you would figure, would have some clout, because Faith No More has one of the most significant albums, The Real Thing, right? That's an important fucking album. If you're like, how does Nirvana exist? Faith No More, The Real Thing. The Pixies. The Replacements. They're following that line. Not whatever fucking LA Guns weird shit that you want to fucking follow. Right? And what's weird, I actually didn't mind hanging out with those kids. Despite their weirdness, like it's weird because it's like manufactured weird. It's not like natural weird, right? It's not like they fucking got creative. It's like, I see a video, I see an album, so I'm going to mimic what I see, right? I'm putting the suit on, right? What I like about early rap is it's raw as fuck and uniquely theirs. And then all of a sudden it's costumes, right? And the Wu-Tang Clan series that's on Hulu kind of covers this in a very interesting way, because understand the buying in of culture was a thing with rap, with hip-hop culture. There was corporations that realized plus minus, let's put some money into this, right? So we can control it to a certain degree. And that's where the argument comes from, right? There's enough going on right now in American culture that can perpetuate everything. And if I honestly think if American culture's artists right now were released to the general public, or the general public became aware of these artists, right, and not estranged from them, levity would be added to our culture. That's a little side thing. So the Great American Whitewash took place between the late 80s and early 90s, and it kept going. The critique of certain things by evangelicals and conservatives were there, very present. And what they did was they roughed into shape what they want. This weird, like if you look at early videos of the New Kids on the Block and all this stuff, this is the same mechanism designed through the Disney Channel eventually forced Nickelodeon channel Lens to redefine NSYNC, Britney Spears, and all that stuff later on. They put them through this really weird pre-manufactured superstar conduit. Now, the takeaway is I just said something negative. So you automatically become resistant. You're like, well, I like these artists. Okay. You like pop culture music. There is a difference between popular music and pop culture music. And you're like, no, they're not. They both mean popular. No. Pre-manufactured superstars and pop sounds are designed by metrics and demographics. Popular music is music that got noted on that became popular. One of the more modern versions was Kate Bush. Kate Bush hit a certain level of popularity in the 80s, but she got really popular after the Stranger Things, right? She went right to the top, probably level 6 of the zeitgeist, right? And nobody knew who she was. And the style of music is very unique. You're like, wait a second, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that was a thing, right? Nothing on that. That's what you're doing. But even in the 80s, it was noted. She was noted, but there's so many, like Madonna took larger precedence, right? She followed that manufactured structure as far as she can go, right? She set the road for it, right? Based on looking back at what the underground's doing and capitalizing it before the underground ever is able to do it themselves. So that's the thing. I'm critiquing the business. These people are doing the job, are contracted to do the job, and sometimes I kind of feel bad for them because I know there's a horrible, evil fucking story behind there because their will is being subverted. Or they're being forgotten about as soon as they lose a level of popularity. This is all relevant, right? Whereas artists that generate themselves, which there's a lot right now, and push themselves forward and do the work and the effort, like a blue-collar person, right? Because the job is the same type of grind as a person working at a fucking factory. Fuck you, right? Same type of grind. But the difference is you own the grind, right? So critique is like, well, you think you could do the paintings and those, things and musical things. You're not going to make people make money. That's the thing. If they're good enough, they get good enough, they're going to make the money. You just got to give them the time and give them the effort, right? And they're going to put the time in. That's the thing. So the Great Whitewash was undermined by alternative culture breaking out. And that's because Generation X found it and said, you know what? We want this. Fuck that. And that's heavily noted. And television had to figure out how to entice us. And when they didn't, they changed to entice the generation behind us. So that's a weird rift between millennials and Gen Xers. And it's really not right because there's more we agree with than disagree with. Just note it. Biafra and Bill Hicks were on point at the point in time the material came out. I just find it weird that Bill Hicks' albums come out in 97. If they were released not that far after his death, unfortunate death, then it would have been a fire. Now, granted, the albums are known. There's a lot of homage to Bill Hicks' material, right? And I think he evolved from comedian to just spoken word artist in a very interesting way. He just happened to be funny. So by comedian metrics, I think, because I've listened to a lot of the Flying Saucer Tour albums. It just vitriol, anger. It's great. You have to listen to it, right? It gets really dark, but understandably so. Because once you realize in the culture. Jello Biafra talks to treating a kid's shift in culture in the 80s to your artifact children. Bill Hicks, fuck these kids, right? But it's the idea of these kids are now precious, these little weird, we're now creating a numbing effect on their childhood. And some specialists at the time saying, well, that's important. We need to have that done. Okay. And then we see the ramifications of it. So, with that said, I have a list. I'm going to end it like this, right? And it's a list of 125 things. And you're like, this episode's running fucking extra long. Well, the whole American whitewash thing wasn't the thing I was going to dive into as much. But I realized that they were setting up for that. So give me a second. So on the side, and over the last year or so, I run a thing called Free Radio America. Been doing it for quite some time. Actually, I kept it going after my time on radio. So it's interesting that I decided to talk about the 21st century albums because I really got sick of people around my age up to late millennials complaining about, oh yeah, the music's not the same. Fuck you. There are albums that come out you just happen not to know about because you're too busy tuning into whatever algorithm these fucking music vendors want to give you, or whatever sources you were pulling them from. Like you stopped reading magazines, and even then magazines weren't necessarily the best examples of that, depending which magazines you read. Radio's not really playing them anymore. Like certain radio stations are probably doing it, but I don't live next to those radio stations, right? So I asked a question about a year ago. I said, hey, what are some of the best albums of the 21st century? And I threw out a large list of stuff, right? It comes down to about 300 albums. And this is albums based on the whole album being good, meaning that there's minimal to no filler on an album. Not filter, filler, right? But there are a lot of albums that, like, I'll give you an example. Like Jay-Z exists, and I don't necessarily mind Jay-Z's material. I just think it's one of those things. He had enough material for one great album, and he sprinkled it over like 3 volumes. And there's a lot, in my opinion, a lot of fill up, but not much. I wouldn't say I want to be the president of the Jay-Z fan club, or I go to albums, not that type of person, right? But again, I don't mind a lot of his material. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. There's a few other bands like this, right? He's the one that just come to mind. So there is a list that was generated. And I was actually kind of surprised. I left it up to the listeners. And I was actually kind of surprised what they chose. So I'm going to read off this list. And some of these artists that had touched the mainstream are kind of like not necessarily mainstream anymore, but like The Cure has an on and off again thing. Even though they're touring right now, they have a large audience fan base, they're not necessarily perpetually played on radios, right? But they had a box set called the Join the Dots, B-Sides and Rarities. It came out in 2004. That was 125. J. Cole, 1214 Forest Drive was 124. The Shouting Matches, Grown Ass Man, was number 123. Plague Vendor, Free to Eat, was 122. Pharaoh Monk, PTSD, which came out in 2014, that was 121. Sleater Kinney, No Cities to Love, 2015. Idols, Ultra Mono, 2020, was 119. The Specials Encore, the last major Specials album before I think Terry Hall died, 2019. AFI Sing the Sorrow, 117. Now, they were pretty mainstream at the time, so that's interesting. Arctic Monkeys, Favorite Worst Nightmare, 2007, 116. Block Party, Silent Alarms Remixed, not the normal Silent Alarms. And this is on here twice, because they were separate releases, and they gained a lot of notoriety. So that's 115. The Coat Hangers, Suck My Shirt, 2014 is when it was released. That's 114. William Shatner. Yeah, William Shatner, the original Captain Kirk, right? That was, he had an album called Has-Been. It came out 2004, and that's 113. That is an interesting album onto itself. It's the only album that's like that. So, Flogging Molly, Drunken Lullabies was 112. Black Thought, Stream of Thought, Volume 1 and 2 came out both in 2018. Slipknot, Volume 3, 2004. Wilco, Sky Blue Sky was 109. Lord, Pure Heroin, extended version, because extended version you get the cover of the replacements. Oh, did you see that coming? That's 108. No Effects, Wolves in Wolf Clothing, 107. Yassine Bey, formerly Mos Def, The New Danger, 106. Death Cab for Cutie, Plans, 105. King Cruel, 6 Feet Under the Moon, 104. The Slackers, Wasted Day, 103. No Effects, The War of Errorism, 102. The Breeders, Title TK in 2002, 101. Run the Jewels 2, 100. Tool Lateralis, 2001, 99. Flaming Lips, Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots, which just had the 20th anniversary tour. 98. Dropkick Murphys, Sing Loud, Sing Proud, 97. Aesop Rock, Spirit World Field Guide, 96. Billy Idol, a remixed album, Vital Idol Revitalized, 2018 was released. 95. Nine Inch Nails, Bad Witch, which they had a couple of EPs around the same time within a few years of each other that were really good. 94, it came in 94. Destroy Boys, Sorry Mom, debut album, 2016, 93. Descendants, Ninth and Walnut, 2021. AFI, December Underground, 2006 release, 91. That was a really big mainstream album. Various Artists, the Rick and Morty soundtrack, 90. Oddly enough, the Rolling Stones got on here with Hackney Diamonds, and they almost made it with Blue Than Lonesome. They made the runners-up. So that was at 89. Parquet Quartz, or Parquet Quartz, dual name. Content Nausea at 88. Snail Mail, Valentine. Snail Mail is the band, Valentine's the album. 87. The Roots, How I Got Over, 86. Primus, Green Naugahyde, 85. JJ Doom, one of MF Doom's collaborative projects. Keys to the Cuffs. Now here's the interesting thing. Butter Edition is better than the original edition, even though they're both good. So if you can get the copy of that, so be it. That's number 84. Now, 83 was M.I.A. Matengi, right? That was an interesting album because they were having a hard time with the label for the album. It came out, the album's fire, right? Alicia Keys, The Diary of Alicia Keys, 82. Pennywise, Land of the Free, 2001, 81. Pennywise is one of those bands you need to see live. Their energy is really good. It's really on point. Division of Valora Lee, Black City, 2002, 80. Westbound Train, ska, third wave, 3.5 wave ska right there. Come and Get It, 2009. Action Bronson, Mr. Wonderful, right? Wu-Tang Clan Chamber Music, which is not necessarily an actual Wu-Tang Clan album. It's chamber music, but it's really good. 77, Danger Doom, The Mouse and the Mask, right? Santo Gold, 2008, 75. 74 was The Roots, Phrenology. 73 was Yaya's Fever to Tell. 72 was Black Star, the second release from them, which came out in 2022. No Fear of Time. Run the Jewels, it was 71 in 2013. And the preset for that would have been rap music, Killer Mike's rap music. The Postal Service gave up 10th Anniversary Edition, right? So the original one was released in 2003. The 10th Anniversary Edition was released in 2013. That is number 70. Various Artists, Songs for Australia. So modern artists doing cover songs of original classics like Beds Are Burning and all that stuff. I advise you to listen to that. It's not bad. Actually, surprising you made the list. Kimya Dawson, Thunder Thighs, 2011 release, 68. 67 was Bad Religion, The Process of Belief. 66 was Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Push the Sky Away. 65 was At the Drive-In, Relationship of Command. 64 was Body Count, Bloodlust. 63 is Minisky Mountain Wood, Uninvincible. 62 is Gogo Bordello, Gypsy Punk. 61 is Tyler the Creator Wolf. 60 was Danger Mouse and Black Thought, Cheat Codes. 59 was Local H Live in Europe. 58 was Earl Sweatshirt, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. 57 was Gnarls Barkley, seen elsewhere. 56 was McCluskey Does Dallas. 55 was Face to Face Protection. 54 was Clipping, but minus the vowels. 53 was Childish Gambino, Because of the Internet. 52 was Vince Staples' Dark Times, which came out last year, which I thought was one of the better albums. I know GNX was like, I think it was better than that. EBA, I could be saying this wrong, self-titled, 2015, has 51. The Beatles, Circus Slay got a hold of their material, did a remix and rework and compilation called Love. And there's some interesting versions of classics and reinterpretations. So that's number 50. 49 was Mortal Technique, The Martyr, which is a compilation. 48, a rap band that probably would have been a lot bigger if they just would have kept their shit together. Rat King, So It Goes. 47, Minisky Mountain Wood, The Dropper. 46, Local H, Whatever Happened to PJ Souls, which is still celebrating its 20th anniversary edition. You can probably get it on vinyl. Erykah Badu, Mama's Gun, which is 45. System of a Down, Steal This Album, was 44. Serge Tankian, Elect the Dead, was 43. Faith No More, Sol Invictus, is 42. 41, Laura Jane Grace, Hole in My Head, which is an album that came out last year. That made 41. That surprised me. Because I don't think Anything Against Me made the top 125, which, again, that shocked me. Because they have some really strong albums. Adele, 21, is number 40. Cave Town, 39, number 39 with Lemon Boy. 38, Soul Glow, Diaspora Problems. I don't know how to pronounce that. 37, Beastie Boys. And here's an interesting thing about the Beastie Boys thing. It's actually a jazz album. The mix-up came out in 2007. There's an EP that follows it, and it's not a normal Beastie Boys album. So that surprised me. That made it too. Tim Armstrong, A Poet's Life, which should have been easily lambasting charts back in 2007, and it wasn't. Alabama Shakes, Girls and Boys, 2012. That was number 35. Number 34 was Blink-182 Self-Titled, which was supposed to be the last album, but ended up not being. 33 was Silver Sun Pickups, Carnivorous. That was 2006. 32 was St. Paul and the Broken Bones, Half the City, 2014. 31, Chance the Rapper, Acid Rap. 30, Big Boy, Boomyverse, something like that. 29, Idols, Tank. I could be pronouncing that wrong too. That came out last year. That was a really good album. 28, Bad Religion, Age of Unreason. 27, Deftones, Ohms. 26 was an interesting. So Swiss Andy and Cecil Otter remixed Fugazi and Wu-Tang Clan. And the result was a thing called Wugazi. Wugazi has 13 chambers. It's a parody of both the Fugazi's 13 songs and 36 Chambers by Wu-Tang Clan. It came out in 2011. It's not a normal album. You have to hunt to get it because it's usually bootlegged. Polo Nudie, Caustic Love, this was a surprise, 25. Kim Gordon, The Collective, last year's album, 24. Rancid, Indestructible, 2003, 23. Interpol, Antics, 22. McCluskeyism, which is a compilation album that surprised me, 21. Cigarettes After Sex, self-entitled, number 20. This came out in 2017. What really surprised me, next one, 19. Catch 22, Alone in the Crowd. Third Wave Ska, the tail end of Third Wave before 3.5, which is classic structure, full ensemble. Yeah, surprisingly, that's number 19. 18 is Amy Winehouse. Now, his is interesting. There's a Back to Black deluxe version, which has a lot of interesting covers, like Toots and the Maytals and all that stuff. And it kind of gives you a full understanding that there's a whole ska element to her material. Number 17, which again surprised me, Green Day, American Idiot, 2004. 16, Kanye West, Yeezus. Now, there's a few albums that made the list, but for some reason, Yeezus ended up making the top 125. Now, interesting enough, is Yeezus and Kim Gordon's The Collective, you can kind of mix together because they both come from that whole deep house concept, right? 15, Fiddler, self-entitled Fiddler, came out 2013. 14, Kendrick Lamar, To Pimp a Butterfly. 13 was White Pony by Deftones. 12 was various artists curated by RZA. So Kill Bill soundtrack volume 1, right? Number 11. In the first charting of this, it was actually higher up, but Nirvana's box set With the Lights Out. Why that's such an important thing? Because that's all the extra songs. There's all the rough songs, all the cover songs. On that one compilation, it wasn't released until the 21st century. So we have 10. Various artists. This surprised me. I'll Be Your Mirror, a tribute to the Velvet Underground and Nico. I was very surprised that it got that much clout. So Florence and the Machine, How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful was number 9. Outkast, Stankonia. Now, there's a few Outkast albums on this list, but this is the one that ended up on this final list. Number 7, Run the Jewels 3. Number 6, Les Claypool and Sean Lennon, the Claypool-Lennon Delirium, South of Reality. Number 5, various artists, and this surprised me the most. Guardians of the Galaxy, Volume 2, Awesome Mix, Volume 2 soundtrack. Made it to number 5. Number 4, Erykah Badu, New America, The Return of Anka, and that came out in 2010. Number 3, this surprised me too, Rancid, either Rancid 2, Rancid 2000, whatever it's called. It's the one that came out in 2000. That made it number 3. Number 2, Charles Bradley Changes. That made it number 2. And number 1, with a lot of numbers and plugs and selections and shares, Amanda Palmer, There Will Be No Intermission. So I'm telling you this right now because I know some of this stuff flirts with the mainstream, but a lot of these albums are really strong albums. And when I've talked to people, different age groups and different variations, a lot of people do not know most of these albums exist. So what does that say? I kept digging. So at various points in time in different platforms, I usually had a playlist going. Free Radio America happens to be on Facebook, and it's run for so long. I just shut it again because it just takes up a lot of time to do. Because I'm doing a lot of things, working, reading, so on and so forth. And that's very important. This list is a list from that, and you can play it back because I just recorded it for you. That's it for me. Jello Biafra, Listen to No More Cocoons, High Priest for Harmful Matter, I Blow Minds for a Living, Beyond the Valley of the Gift Police. If evolution is outlawed, outlaws will evolve, right? And focus on that, because he actually talks about, I think all his baseline is money being poured into evangelical right. At some point in time, this did happen, because they ended up becoming their watchdogs in a very weird way. And he hints on this heavily. The other thing is Bill Hicks' albums, specifically Ranting in E minor, again, variations. Understand, they were released in 1987, and the variations wasn't released until like the last decade. And somebody's doing a great job, God's work to be able to get that going, right? I just said God's work, but it is what it is, right? I do have some belief. Not an atheist. So take that into consideration. Any which way it goes, so be it. I'll see you at another point.